Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Rob Bleakney. As I mentioned before, tonight's program, telling the story of two unsung heroes of Worcester and the Exodus 1947 story, came about over 2 years ago. And Rob has done all of this research as original research. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rob and to hear this terrific presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in honoring the Exodus 1947 and two unsung heroes of Worcester, the Reverend John Stanley Growl and Judge Joseph Goldberg. Lying in Boston Harbor is a ship that residents of Boston have long been proud to claim as their own, the USS Constitution, also known as Old Ironsides, which defeated 5 British ships during the War of 1812. And those of us from Worcester can also be proud, as 2 outstanding men from our city were associated with another great ship, the Exodus 1947. This heroic ship attempted to bring 4,500 Holocaust survivors from France to the land of Israel. The Reverend John Stanley Growl was a Worcester native, Methodist minister, and part of the ship's crew. Judge Joseph Goldberg held court in Worcester, supported the ship's voyage, and was described by Growl as his friend and Zionist mentor. Like Old Ironsides, this ship had a battle at sea with the British Navy. It lost that battle, but its cause triumphed anyway. And so the Exodus 1947 is remembered as the ship that launched a nation, the State of Israel. It is my privilege today to tell you the story of these great men from Worcester and this historic ship, before, during, and after its voyage. Before its voyage. Joseph Goldberg was born in Kyiv in 1903. His family moved here to Worcester in 1904. He attended high school and college here in Worcester, studied law at Boston University, served as a judge and later as a special justice here, and he died here in 1993. When Goldberg was an undergraduate at Clark University, he joined hundreds of other students in a march for Zionism, and this experience changed his life. Later, he presided as a judge in Worcester's old courthouse. Goldberg was a member of Congregation Beth Israel in 2 of its locations. He was also friendly with Chabad. Over time, Goldberg became one of America's most tireless advocates for a Jewish homeland. Journalists Robin Shapiro and Philip Davis from the Jewish Chronicle honored him as Worcester's foremost architect of Zionism. They added, Goldberg's zest and zeal on behalf of Zionism have taken him to more than 44 states, introduced him to individuals such as Chaim Weizmann and David Ben-Gurion, and driven him to contribute greatly to the formation of the State of Israel. As for John Stanley Growl, He was born in 1917 at Hahnemann Hospital on Lincoln Street. His father, also named John, was a railroad brakeman who grew up on Liberty Street. His family worshiped at Wesley Methodist Church, where its pastor encouraged young Growl to pursue Methodist ministry. Years later, he also enjoyed worshiping with an AME Zionist church. At home, the youth's mother, Jemina Growl, taught him about social conscience. In the early 1930s, as Stalin's Soviet Union deliberately starved millions of people of Ukraine, Growl's mother vividly conveyed to her sons her sense of horror at such monstrous inhumanity. And as Hitler prepared for another genocide, this time against Jews, this Methodist Christian mother taught her sons that Judaism must survive, that Judaism was the root of her own faith, and that the Jews were God's chosen people. As for himself, the Reverend Growl said, "It is my own deep conviction that the death of Israel would be the death of Western civilization." In the early 1940s, Growl became a student at Bangor Theological Seminary and a student pastor of 2 Methodist churches on the coast of Maine. During this time, Growl became very distressed by news from Nazi Germany, such as a picture similar to this one of Nazi thugs abusing Jews. He talked about defending Jews on the radio, which resulted in complaints to the station. Growl knew the right man to talk with about his concerns, Judge Joseph Goldberg, who gave him books to read on Zionism and awakened his interest in the search for a Jewish homeland. And so the two men began a lasting friendship. In Stonington, Maine, Growl was serving as a Methodist student pastor when in 1943, a Jewish shopkeeper was targeted for contempt and malicious vandalism. Growl contacted 2 other pastors, and the 3 of them put on their church robes and led a community cleanup in support of their Jewish neighbor. For Growl, the nightmare that Jews were experiencing in Europe at the hands of Nazis was haunting him. And so he asked Goldberg how he could make a significant contribution. The judge referred him to Dr. Carl Herman Voss of the American Christian Palestine Committee, which advocated for a Jewish homeland. And Voss hired Growl to head its Philadelphia office. Just down the hall from that office, it so happened that the Jewish organization called Haganah also had an office. After World War II, Jewish survivors of the Holocaust had been campaigning in refugee camps for a return to their ancestral homeland. Thank you kindly. In demonstrations like this one, timing is good, they declared, "We want to go, we must go, we will go to Palestine." Supporting their dream, Growl joined the Haganah in 1946. The British had been trying to prevent Jewish immigrants from going to the land of Israel, and so the Haganah aimed to buy a ship that would break their blockade. Growl met regularly with its top leaders, helped it raise funds, and agreed to join the crew. The Haganah bought a retired steamship called the President Warfield, which later would be renamed the Exodus 1947. It needed lots of repairs. Before the ship's voyage began, its financial sponsors, surely including Judge Goldberg, hosted a farewell ceremony. At it, the Methodist minister told a story to clarify why he had joined the ship's otherwise all-Jewish crew. During World War II, he said, 9 Jewish soldiers were camped out at a monastery in Italy. But to say prayers together, they needed a minyan of 10 Jews. One of these 9 soldiers saw a statue of Jesus and pointed at it saying, "He's Jewish." And so they counted him as part of their minyan and proceeded with their prayers. For Reverend Growl, telling this story was his way of saying that he felt a kinship with the Jewish people, even if he belonged to a different tribe. The historic voyage. On February 25, 1947, the President Warfield departed with Growl from Baltimore. Goldberg bid a bon voyage from the dock. While crossing the Atlantic in March 1947, Growl, under the Arrow, joined 2 Jewish crewmates, Bill Bernstein and another man, as they prepared for Shabbat. In April 1947, Growl, under the Arrow, joined Jewish crewmates in celebrating Passover. He reflected that they were celebrating the biblical Exodus while crossing the Atlantic in support of a new Exodus. In June, the ship had a layover in Italy. When visiting Rome, Growl visited the Arch of Titus, the Roman emperor who destroyed the Jewish temple in 70 CE. Through the arch, Titus had boasted of his conquest of Jews. But Growl saw the arch instead as evidence for the eternity of the Jewish people. Long ago, he marveled, both Titus and the Roman Empire had turned to dust. And this old arch showed signs of decay. But the people of Israel remained alive. In other words, Am Yisrael Chai. And they were on the verge of reclaiming their homeland. In France, thousands of refugees, many of them orphans, boarded the ship. British authorities persuaded French police to order the ship not to sail, but it escaped out of the harbor anyway. The ship was very crowded. Designed for only 400 passengers, its crew had made adjustments. allowing it to be packed with 4,500. The ship had limited space for eating, and its bathroom conditions were filthy. But those who had been in concentration camps had seen worse. Years later, the ship's commander, Yossi Harel, wondered why the ship didn't capsize with so many people on board, unless sustained by a power stronger than all the laws of science. When the ship reached international waters, the Haganah gave the President Warfield a new name, the Exodus 1947, and the ship headed toward Eretz Israel. Even so, the British Navy had another idea. On July 18th, at around 2 a.m., 5 British destroyers and 1 cruiser rammed the ship repeatedly and boarded it in international waters. The ship's passengers were unarmed, but they fought the British Navy vigorously for hours, throwing potatoes, fruit, and canned goods at armed Marines. While this battle was underway, one of the crew hoisted the ship's flag of Zion. And even while defending themselves, thousands of passengers began singing a love song, Hatikva. Broadcasting on the radio, Growl let the world know of the British attack against a refugee ship. Eventually, though, the ship had to surrender. 3 died as a result of this attack. Bill Bernstein, an American war hero, aged 23, and 2 16-year-old Holocaust survivors, Hirsch Yakubovich, one of the boys on the right, and Mordecai Baumstein, not shown. As the ship drew near to the coast of Haifa, over the ocean waters could be heard thousands of passengers singing Hatikva. After the voyage, the British had rammed the Exodus in 3 directions. Journalist Ruth Gruber said the ship looked like a matchbox that had been splintered by a nutcracker. In Haifa, Growl met with reporters, including Ruth Gruber, telling them that he was from Worcester, Massachusetts. Yes. And accusing the British of piracy. Growl also went to Jerusalem, where he told the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine that he had the ship's log to prove its location outside of territorial waters when attacked by the British, with 1,200 children on board and not a single weapon. He also briefed Jewish leaders like Golda Meir, and he visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Growl next returned by ship back to the United States, where his mother welcomed him to her home on Wachusett Street in Worcester. Judge Goldberg also welcomed Growl back to Worcester with a dinner and mass meeting. As for the Holocaust survivors who had traveled on the Exodus 1947, what happened to them? They continued to insist on going to Palestine. But the British sent them instead to prison camps in Germany. Germany. Outraged, Jews around the world, including refugees from the Holocaust, protested the imprisonment of the passengers in Germany. For any British hoping to retain control over Palestine, this saga had become a disaster. On September 3rd, 1947, Judge Goldberg, with the Zionist Organization of America, protested the brutality and cruelty of the British, saying, "I saw the President Warfield leave Baltimore. I spent many hours with William Bernstein. Reverend Stanley Growl is a personal friend of mine. I brought him into the Zionist movement. Naturally, I am deeply affected by all that happened to this ship, to this boat." But Goldberg soon had cause for rejoicing. For that same day, the UN committee recommended ending the British mandate and partitioning Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. On May 14, 1948, the modern state of Israel was born. By then, the Haganah had managed to smuggle nearly all the passengers of the Exodus 1947 out of prison camps and into their homeland. Lest a new generation forget, Growl in 1975 led an educational tour for Jewish youth of Nazi concentration camps and the land of Israel, much like tours continuing today through the International March of the Living. The State of Israel has honored Reverend Growl through the Humanity Medal, the Fighter for Israel Medal, the Medal of Jerusalem, and nomination as a righteous Gentile. Later in 1986, Growl was buried in Jerusalem with full naval military honors, with his tombstone declaring, as we have heard, "He who saves a single life, it is as if he had saved the entire world." As for Judge Goldberg, he was promoted to become a special justice of the Central District Court and was honored in 1976 with the David Ben-Gurion Award for more than 40 years of service to the state of Israel and Zionism, like this award for Elie Wiesel the year before. In 1993, Justice Goldberg died at age 89 in the Jewish Home for Aged, now the Jewish Healthcare Center. And his wife, Nell, died in 2006. They are buried at the B'nai B'rith Cemetery in Worcester. Conclusion. May our city's memories of Judge Goldberg and Reverend Growl be a blessing as we honor their legacy of Holocaust remembrance, interfaith friendship, and public service, including on behalf of the Holocaust survivors of the Exodus 1947. Amen.
Educational, original, and uplifting. I'll take all that you got, Rob. That was terrific. Thank you.